Welcome to this Tutor to You A-Level Sociology Revision Blast on Global Development. In this video, we're going to focus on agencies of global development and some of the theories of global development. So in this revision blast, we're going to focus on the first three specification points on the AQA A-Level specification for global development. That is looking at development, underdevelopment and global inequality, globalization and its influence on the cultural, political and economic relationships between societies. And for the most part, we're going to focus on the role of transnational corporations, non-governmental organisations and international agencies in local and global strategies for development. We have a number of activities that we're going to go through that tackle these specification points. Our first one is a 5-4-3-2-1. In the 5-4-3-2-1 activity, we give students 2 minutes to identify 5 sociological concepts, ideas or theories, 4 of the same, 3, 2, 1. So you will see a list in a moment of the things that we are looking for, but you'll have 2 minutes to identify these. If you do need any further time to complete the activity, press pause, and that goes for any activity in this revision blast. So we want students to identify 5 stages of modernisation, that is Rostow's modernisation theory, 4 agencies of development, 3 types of aid, 2 theoretical approaches to development, and 1 sociologist that we would associate with development. Of course, that one is quite broad, but this is to get you started on this session. You can have 2 minutes to answer these questions. The music starts now.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And time is up. Let's look at some of our responses. So the 5 stages of modernisation according to Rostow's modernisation theory are traditional society, preconditions for takeoff, drive to maturity and the age of mass consumption. 4 agencies of development, World Bank, the IMF, the World Trade Organization and non-governmental organisations. We could have also had IGOs as a general term. You can also have TNCs or nation states. 3 types of aid: tied aid, multilateral aid and bilateral aid. There are others you could have had, which we will discuss later in this session. 2 theoretical approaches to development: neoliberalism and dependency theory. Could also have modernisation theory or post-development theory, or even world systems theory. And 1 sociologist associated with development. Well, there's lots of sociologists who are associated with international development. I've gone with Andre Gunder Frank and dependency theory. In our 60-second challenge, you have 60 seconds to match the type of aid to the definition. We want you to match the letters on the left with the numbers on the right. So we have the definitions on the left-hand side. Aid directly given from one nation to another. B, aid distributed by a third or subsequent parties to nations in need. C, loans that have to be spent in the country that are administered to them. D, aid given in a time of crisis. And E, aid administered by NGOs based upon public donations. And the types of aid are listed on the right hand side of the screen: humanitarian aid, tied aid, multilateral aid, bilateral aid and charitable aid. You have 60 seconds to match up the definition to the type of aid, starting now. Okay, let's look at the responses. So aid given directly from one nation to another is what's called bilateral aid. Aid distributed by a third or subsequent party to nations in need is multilateral aid. C is loans that have to be spent in the country that are administered to them is tied aid. Aid that is given at a time of a crisis is humanitarian aid, and aid that is administered by NGOs based upon public donations is charitable aid. And we are linking this in to our agencies of development because these are the people who administer most aid. Our next activity is a big reveal. In the big reveal, we are going to give you clues towards a concept or idea. We're going to reveal them one at a time. The aim is to guess the concept or idea or theory in as little time as possible. So our first clue, it is an agent of development, which doesn't narrow it down very much, but you may want to have a guess at a specific agent of development. Our second clue is that they are the largest employers in the developing world. This may narrow it down slightly. You think about our agencies of development and who are likely to employ people in the developing world and who are likely to be the largest employers in the developing world. Number 3, they provide formal employment. Again, this should really start narrowing it down for you into one of those agencies of development. Number 4, they are often based in Western nations, although we would argue they are seen as having no geographical base. They are often based in Western nations. And they are defined by Bakan as being institutional psychopaths. And if you guessed quite early on that they were transnational corporations, you would be correct. Let's look at our second big reveal. It's a global organization. That might not narrow it down too much in terms of agencies of development. It administers aid, so this might narrow it down a little bit more. Which agencies of development administer aid? They often apply structural adjustment policies. We might be narrowing this down to 1 or 2 specific agents of development here. The aid can be for infrastructure development. This may narrow it down even further. And it was founded at the Bretton Woods Conference It is the World Bank, one of the largest international governmental organisations that administers aid for infrastructure development to the developing world. Our third big reveal: they often adopt people-centred approaches. This may narrow it down somewhat. Remember, we're focused on agencies of development here. They work with people in the developing world. They are less bound by legislation and red tape. They are smaller and able to move quicker. They have been accused of transmitting Western values into the developing world. And examples include CAFOD and Red Cross. If you guessed pretty early on that we are talking about non-governmental organisations, NGOs, you would be correct. And there are some of the features of NGOs, both strengths and limitations. Now for our next activity, we're going to look at a speculative question and we're going to do a little bit of analysis. So a speculative question might be outline and explain two ways that international governmental organisations can influence conflict in the developing world. This is linking the specification point about agencies of development to the specification point about war and conflict, the environment, urbanisation and industrialisation. And this is what happens on the exam paper, is you outline and explain questions, look to make a link between two different specification points. We're going to use the stepping stones activity to try and complete a chain of analysis to illustrate the cause and effect here and make that link between the specification point on agencies of development and the specification point on war and conflict. So we've identified a cause and an effect here, and what we want you to do is to try and fill in the stepping stones that exist. So we've identified that one way IGOs can influence conflict is through aid. And at the bottom, this has a cause. It creates conflict in the developing world as people look to access resources. So what we need to do now is we need to make the link between IGOs administering aid and how this leads to a lack of resources or people looking to access resources. The first line we might put in here, and how aid takes the form of loans that need to be repaid. Well, what does this lead to? If we need to repay the loans, they administer aid. Aid creates what? This generates debt for nations and leads to cuts in social spending. And now we need to make the link between cuts in social spending and ability to access resources. This places pressure on services and creates poverty, particularly in urban areas. And then this creates conflict in the developing world as people look to access those resources. So you can see we've taken a number of different steps towards linking IGOs and conflict. Let's look at a second example. A second way IGOs can influence conflict is through promoting free trade policies. So we're talking about aid and trade, which are often two of the key functions of international governmental organisations, and how this leads to conflict due to a scarcity of resources. So how can promoting free trade lead to a scarcity of resources? Well, we need to make the link. What does free trade do to the developing world? Well, we need to think, how do IGOs promote free trade? IGOs such as the World Bank and the IMF promote free trade agreements, and this allows TNCs to access resources and sell goods to developing nations in competition with local traders. This may then cause local traders to over-farm of land, which leads to desertification, or potentially drives local producers out of business, which creates unemployment and creates poverty. Because individuals then have a scarcity of resources, either through desertification or being unable to afford goods and services, this potentially leads to conflict in the developing world, particularly in urban areas. And we've made another link between IGOs and conflict in the developing world. For our final activity, we are going to do a connection wall. There are 4 groups of phrases here, and what we would like you to do is to group them into 4 groups of 4. So we have Eon, Total, Royal Dutch Shell, Oxfam, United Kingdom, World Trade Organization, United States, UNICEF, Save the Children, France, Action Aid, General Electric, China, the United Nations, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. What we want you to do is to group these in to 4 sets of 4. Now, if you consider what the main focus of this revision blast has been on, agencies of development, that may help you in grouping these 4 sets of 4. I'll give you a moment to try and group those 4 sets of 4. Come up with the 4 groups first, and then we will identify some of those that belong in those groups. If you do need any further time to complete the activity, remember you can always press pause, but we're going to reveal our first group of 4 now. So this one was international governmental organisations. So we've got the World Trade Organization, the United Nations, International Monetary Fund, the IMF, and the World Bank. These are 4 examples of international governmental organisations. This might help you to come up with the other categories and group the others together. We have 4 IGOs. If you're ready, we will come up with our second group. Now, our second group are NGOs. Save the Children, Action Aid, UNICEF and Oxfam. These are non-governmental organisations who help with international development. We may be narrowing this down now. We've got IGOs, NGOs. What are the other agencies of development? And which of those are examples of those types of agencies of development? So our third group are transnational corporations: E.ON, the electricity company; Total, oil company; Royal Dutch Shell, oil and General Electric, an energy company as well. Which leaves our final group of 4, who are all agencies of development. But what type of agencies of development? The United Kingdom, France, United States and China. Well, of course, they are nation states, and they are all involved in the administration of aid, often through making donations to the IMF or the World Bank, or also through bilateral aid. That is aid that is given directly from one country to another. That concludes this Tutor to You A-Level Sociology Revision Blast on Global Development, focused on agencies of global development. Thanks for watching.